Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Poole from CBCRP. I'm a program officer for community initiatives and public health sciences. First, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. And wanted to share a few logistics on how we'll run the breakout today. Our presenters have already raised their hands, so you can see them at the top of your gallery. And you're invited to turn your video off so that we can only see our presenters and anything that they are sharing. And for our presenters, I will chat to you directly to give you time checks and help us run on schedule. For our attendees, as questions come up for you, please post them in the chat because we have time set aside for moderated questions and answers. At CBCRP, we know that communities that are most affected by breast cancer can take a leading role in research into the disease. This breakout session was developed to highlight examples of research projects that came directly from California communities and the questions that they had about their health. The presentations are also going to highlight how research can be used to answer community concerns. I hope that at some point during today's breakout session, you have a thought that you could see yourself and your communities getting involved in research. CBCRP funds community-partnered participatory research. As a result of the vision of our director, Mel Cavanaugh Lynch, CBCRP has been funding Community Research Collaboration Awards, or CERC, for 27 years. In the chat, I will place the link to our webpage and my email address. You are welcome to email me with your questions. I encourage it. Any questions you have about CERC grants, and please don't be shy. It's part of my work to talk to people about CERC, so you can think of it as keeping me in a job. I'd like to shift to introducing our first speakers. I'm going to introduce both Nayamin and Gina. So Nayamin Martinez is the director of the Central California Environmental Justice Network. Ms. Martinez has vast experience working with immigrants and residents of disadvantaged communities across the San Joaquin Valley, managing public health programs, conducting participatory research, and launching leadership and civic engagement programs. Ms. Martinez holds a master's degree in both public health and sociology. Gina Solomon is the chief of the Division of Occupational, Environmental, and Climate Medicine at UCSF, where she oversees clinical occupational health activities at 3 hospital sites, leads research efforts in environmental health, and directs the Occupational and Environmental Medicine Residency Program. From 2018 to 2023, Dr. Solomon was a program director at the Public Health Institute in Oakland, California, where she established and led the Achieving Resilient Communities, or ARC project, to identify, test, and expand actionable interventions to reduce climate change impacts in farm worker communities. From 2012 to 2018, Dr. Solomon served as the Deputy Secretary for Science and Health at the California Environmental Protection Agency. And before that, she was a senior scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And now I will turn it over to Nayamin and Gina.
Thank you so much. Just getting a text from Nayamin that she just joined. So I think she's now making her way from the main room into our breakout room.
Fabulous.
So she should be here, any second.
Okay.
So let's see, just pulling up the presentation. Is that?
So we can see your PowerPoint page? Perfect. We can see your presentation. Mm-hmm.
Great. So Nayamin was actually going to be starting, but I'll just introduce the project generally. We're going to be presenting on a project called Fresca Mujeres. with the goal that had the goal of reducing wildfire smoke exposure among farm worker women in the Central Valley of California. The problem relates to, and the solution are all pictured here on the initial slide. And so this will be an opportunity for everybody to become familiar with the evaporative cooler or swamp cooler, which is a very common fixture on rooftops or in this case, side mounted in homes, mostly in low income communities throughout dry regions of California and the rest of the world. So we really, see these a lot. So this is the problem that we were trying to solve. The advantages of swamp coolers is that they're pretty effective in dry climates at cooling the air, and they're very energy efficient and they're very inexpensive. So a lot of folks, especially those who don't want to be paying a lot of money for air conditioning, choose these, or have no choice if they're renters, and these are provided by their landlords. And Nayamin, great, thank you for joining. They're asking us to raise
our breakout rooms.
Yeah, I know that I had that problem as well. So I was just getting started. We've been introduced. So I'll let you take it from here with the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gina. And I apologize, everyone, for being lost. My name is Nayamin Martinez. I'm a co-PI for the Fresca Mujeres project with Dr. Gina Solomon. I'm also the executive director for the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And, for you to understand what prompted this Fresca Mujeres project, I need to give you the context, especially for those of you that are not too familiar with what we call the Central Valley of California. We have more similarities to other regions of the country than to the rest of the state, because as you could see on the map to the left, that's the map of Cal and Barrow Screen, and we are the orangey and dark orange area. That means that we have a higher burden of pollution than other parts of the state. We also have more social vulnerability. And one of the many sources of pollution that we have here is air pollution. So the valley is the basin in the entire United States with the worst air quality. So that kind of, if we can go to the next slide, please. That kind of motivated that a big part of what CCJN has been doing to promote environmental justice is to educate and to help residents be protected from this air pollution. So when we were doing just exactly that, we were doing a community presentation in Huron, California, with residents from Kalinga and Huron. And we're talking about, how can you know if the air pollution is bad? How can you protect yourself? And we were talking about changing the filters, that you should change them often, that you should use the MERV 13s, etc. And then someone raised her hand and said, excuse me, what shall I do? I have a swamp cooler. And the swamp cooler, for those of you that you don't know, is what we are seeing in that image right there. It's an evaporative cooler. And these are very common devices that are used in our Central Valley in mobile homes and rural areas to cool the houses. So people, instead of having a central air conditioning unit, they have these devices. And I had to go back and tell the resident, I'll get back to you, because I didn't know. I didn't know that was, that was not something that was available to residents, meaning to have a filter that they could be changing to protect indoor air quality. And that's how this project started, from a need and from an idea from a community member. So we turned around and consulted with our, we have the luxury of having good connections with, researchers such as Gina and others from the Public Health Institute, the Track in California, and many other institutions. And we were like, excuse us, can you help us with this? this is an important need for the community because imagine what happened to our community when we had the wildfires that our region endured. The wildfires happened during the summer season. So at that point, people had to be turning on their swamp coolers because we had over 100 degrees. But that meant that they were exposed to the smoke inside their homes. And the people who were suffering from this were mostly people who are farm workers, who are people of low income, sources that, they did what they could to go by. And that really prompted the motivation behind this project. And that's how the Fresca Mujeres project started. We can go to the next slide. At the beginning, Fresca has been like a multifaceted project. So as you could see in the next slide, the why this project? Well, it was to design a filter for these swamp coolers that could be easy to install, affordable, because as I said, farm workers don't have a lot of money, and effective, right? And the main thing was to pilot this intervention in homes of agricultural workers. So that was the original project funded by US EPA. But then if we can go to the next slide, then we added Fresca Mujeres. That is the project that we submitted to the Breast Cancer Center. And the goal was to narrow down to see the effect of in women. If their exposure to wildfires would make them more vulnerable to breast cancer. And I will now pass it on to Gina because she is the physician who has been designing a lot of the, the biosamples that we have been collecting and understanding how these samples can tell us how is this smoke and air pollution affecting the health of these farm worker women.
Thanks, Nayamin. And yeah, this project really did come about because Nayamin reached out with this question about swamp coolers, and we're like, well, the original question was, is there a filter for these things that could help people? And so I was like, surely there's got to be something out there. And I looked around. I was even checking out, the Home Depot website, all of these kinds of resources. And I discovered not only was there no filter for swamp coolers that exists, but in addition, there was almost no research on swamp coolers, which I think is an important environmental justice point. You can find gobs of research on HVAC systems, central air conditioning systems, ventilation systems of all kinds, if you dig into that type of sort of more engineering literature. And I literally found 2 studies that had ever been published on swamp coolers. So, that showed a serious need and a serious need for an intervention strategy. And then we were fortunate to get another partner on board, the Illinois Institute of Technology, where there are some great engineers who were excited about helping work on this problem. And then the additional components here were also, in part, were very much designed in partnership with the community, because people were interested not only in the particulate matter, but also what toxic chemicals were getting in. And then what might be the effects in their bodies in terms of things like oxidative stress and inflammation. And then there was interest in cumulative impacts. How do we measure cumulative stress from all of the different factors that Nayamin mentioned, the different pollutants in the Central Valley? And that's where we added something that in some ways was not directly tied to our intervention, but had never been done before, which was telomere length in farm worker women in the Central Valley. And so those were all components. We ended up, CCEJN has expertise all up and down the Central Valley, a lot of wonderful community contacts and community organizers. We worked with CCEJN. They really helped determine what areas to focus on. We chose a number of different towns that all had, large populations of farm workers, a lot of folks with swamp coolers, and people on the ground from CCEJN that were trained and actually did most of the work on this project. Just to give a sense of the study participants, our main study took place this past summer. 100% of our participants were Latina. Most actually owned their homes and had lived in their homes for more than 5 years, which might go against some people's preconceived notions of farm workers. But in fact, a lot of these folks were proud owners of mobile homes, and people really, had a sense of community in a lot of these trailer parks where they, had gardens and really had, a very strong sense of a neighborhood. And so that was sort of the main study population. We did have some renters. I think our population was skewed more towards homeowners because there were challenges with the landlords. And in fact, some of the folks who dropped from our study, we lost a total of 8 people, were dropped because of landlord issues. Unfortunately, either evictions or just problems with the landlord not wanting us doing the work in their homes. More than 3/4 of our participants worked in the field. And another fraction worked in packing sheds or other kinds of packing, food packing type jobs. A few people in other agriculturally related jobs. Unfortunately, as you can see here, 1/4 of the participants were completely uninsured, which is really distressing when you think about the multiple sources of stress and exposure that these folks are facing. About a little under half rated their air quality as extremely bad, and another 40%. So we get to almost 85% that the air quality was either somewhat or extremely bad. And a lot of people had health impacts from the heat or the air quality. So really, population that was quite impacted. And we went in and in half the homes installed what you see here, which is very much a do-it-yourself filtration strategy for the swamp coolers. One of the things, as I think, I'll show you in another slide or so, is that these are somewhat different in terms of their shapes and sizes. So we needed something that was flexible. We needed something that was pretty simple to install and remove, relatively affordable, though it turns out that these 4-inch thick MERV 13 filters are not as inexpensive as one might hope. We were taking our inspiration really from the Corsi Rosenthal box, for people who are familiar with those, or some people call them box fan filters, but it's really a box fan with these types of filters attached to it in a sort of a box shape and duct taped together. It works extremely effectively as an air cleaner. So we were like, well, if it could work, as an air cleaner, this could work on a swamp cooler too. So you could see our team members here, in some cases doing the installation. You also see in the center bottom, one of the air cleaners that we used inside the home. It turned out that in our pilot study, when we tested out this strategy, it substantially reduced the pollution that came into the home, but only only by about 60%. So that meant that still there was a fair amount getting past the filtration. We paired our strategy with an indoor air cleaner to address, whatever did get past.
Gina, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, so sorry, we're at time, so if you could please wrap maybe the most important slide that you have left.
Yep. So we're at this point right now, we're analyzing the data. We're getting ready to return the results. We're committed to returning all the results to individual participants and to the communities. And we also are in the process of doing stories in partnership with Story Center to allow the women who want to tell their stories on video about their health concerns and smoke exposure. And we're going to be working towards policy change to try to implement solutions for folks who are dealing with swamp coolers, because research is one thing, but really the goal here is to make a difference and to clear the air that people are breathing. So that's it. Just a fantastic study team with people from PHI, Illinois Institute of Technology, and CCJN working together in the field. And just want to thank Nayamin for being a fantastic partner in this work.
Thank you so
Gina.
much. Thank you both, Nayamin and Gina, for your excellent presentation. We have set aside some time at the end of our breakout for moderated questions and answers. So please type your questions into the chat. And I apologize for the tight time frame today. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Polly Marshall. Polly has a BA degree from UC Santa Cruz and a law degree from UC Berkeley. He worked for 30 years as an attorney specializing in affordable housing development, and also served for 35 years as a commissioner on the San Francisco Rent Control Board. Polly was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009 and began training and working as a breast cancer prevention advocate. He founded Breast Cancer Over Time, a nonprofit created and controlled by breast cancer survivors and dedicated to supporting scientific research into breast cancer prevention. Polly leads a support group for women with breast cancer and is the community principal investigator on a research study on the impact of estrogenic chemicals found in personal care products on normal human breast cells donated by women who have never had breast cancer. Polly also leads healing circles for people living with cancer and is a legislative advocate in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. She is the mother of two. And now I will turn it over to Polly.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. As Sen said, I'm a 14-year breast cancer survivor, and I was the community principal investigator on this study. And I've been asked to tell you our story, how we got from a group of women in treatment for breast cancer to the community co-sponsor of this community-based participatory research study, which ended up being having significant findings about the effect of estrogenic chemicals in personal care products on breast cells still in women's bodies. This presentation is going to be a bit different because we weren't an established organization. And also because we partnered with a bench scientist, a cell biologist. And she isn't here today. So this is very much going to be from the point of view of how we got from just a concerned group of people to doing this study. Oops. Okay, I am trying to advance. Here we go. So, Breast Cancer Overtime's members were all part of a breast cancer support group at the California Pacific Medical Center. And we met there weekly to support each other through scans, surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation, and the ravages of anti-estrogen drugs. And then as members of our group began to emerge from the throes of active treatment, and we could think beyond the immediacy of saving our own lives, our discussions turned to what we could do to prevent our own young daughters and their friends, their neighbors, indeed the whole next generation of young women from getting breast cancer. To protect our children and to teach them to protect themselves, we wanted to know which exposures over which they have some control, including the products they use, pose breast cancer risks. So most studies that conclude a substance is carcinogenic to humans are based mainly on correlations, which means you have to wait a long time to find out what chemicals increase breast cancer risk. We did not want to wait around to see what in our current environment might contribute to breast cancer in our daughters 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. We really wanted to do something now that could lead to decreased exposures to carcinogens now. And we weren't scientists, of course, who could research our own answers, but we thought maybe we can use our status as breast cancer survivors to make a difference in preventing breast cancer. So our group of women had shared experiences and a shared sense of urgency and anger. How did we get breast cancer? What were our children being exposed to right now that might be increasing their breast cancer risk? And so we sat down and we made a list of 40 types of exposures we were worried about, and where we discovered hard scientific information was missing. And so then we educated ourselves. We interviewed advocates, doctors, breast cancer researchers, our families, our friends, and we learned what legislative efforts were already underway. And so we learned that most scientific studies about breast cancer are not about prevention or even about causation, excluding, of course, those studies that are funded by CBCRP. Most studies are about treatment and, you know, the ever elusive cure to breast cancer. And why is that? Well, because they're sponsored by big medical centers and by hospitals who make their money from treatments and from drug sales. There really isn't much money in prevention. So we learned that Breast Cancer Prevention Partners was working on legislation to eliminate carcinogenic chemicals from personal care products in California. They had just produced a study on the presence of estrogen-like chemicals in common personal care products. And when we talked to them, they said there was really kind of a research gap on the links of exposure to parabens and phthalates to breast cancer. And we talked to young people. What were they worried about? What kind of scientific information did they need? So we are starting to home in on supporting breast cancer prevention research on the breast cancer risks associated with certain chemicals found in personal care products, like we've been hearing about in the session, and chemicals that we learned were already banned in cosmetics in the EU, and to a lesser extent in Japan and Canada. So we were ready to take action. We wanted to find scientists whose work might help us find answers to these questions. And how we did this really connects back to our own experiences as women living with breast cancer. So during my third breast cancer surgery, this time with Dr. William Goodson, who's shown here, I donated breast cells from my uninvolved breast for research. I went back to Dr. Goodson and I asked him what my cells had been used for. And he introduced me to Dr. Shanaz Derki at the CPMC Research Institute. We learned from her that most breast cancer causation studies were animal studies. Rats and mice were exposed to chemicals and their cellular responses were studied. But in contrast, Dr. Derki's studies focused on normal human breast cells donated by women like me having breast surgery. She cultured these cells in her lab and studied the changes in them when they were exposed to xenoestrogens, which are man-made, and I do mean man-made, chemicals that behave like estrogen. She had used my breast cells, normal cells coming from a high-risk person, to study the impact of exposure to BPA, which was a xenoestrogen at the time commonly found in plastic water bottles. So she hoped to do more research using human breast cells, more that then could be obtained from women having surgery. And we in turn asked her if she could possibly study the impact of xenoestrogens in cosmetics on the breast tissue of young women who had never had cancer. She was very interested, but the research would be challenging to design, and we would need funding for the expensive bench science that she did. So finally, we realized through all of this that we actually, as this group of women, have resources to offer to a study that would contribute to breast cancer prevention. We had access to people, actually our own children and their peers, who would eagerly participate in research. We found a scientist doing excellent research on breast cancer prevention, and we could recruit breast cell donors to further her research to answer our specific questions about cosmetics. And then when she brought up funding, we realized that our very existence and our pathway to get where we were could also start us on our pathway to funding. So we were ready to learn about community-based participatory research. And so now this is going to sound like an advertisement for the Quick Start program that CBCRP does, but that's really what enabled us to pursue this research. So we kind of found out about the Quick Start program by accident. One of our members went to the Cancer Help program at Commonweal, and she got an email about Quick Start, and she sent it to me, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, there's a program that offers training to people like us, to community folks, teamed up with scientists. And not only do they train us on community-based research, but they also did training on environmental exposures and cancer risk. So I attended this training with my partner, Dr. Derki. So Quick Start first led us through the question, who is our community? Who needs and wants this research? Who will participate in it? And the answer turned out to be very broad, which is fine, which is good. Breast cancer patients and survivors, our families, our friends, everyone whose lives have been touched by breast cancer, and everyone who wants to prevent it. These were the people who would help us recruit breast cancer donors, breast cell donors, and these would be our study participants. And then what other community research is out there that we could learn from? And we found out through Quick Start about their Hermosa study, which had teenage girls who gave urine samples before and after changing cosmetic use for 3 days. That study became our model and our inspiration. We really felt we were standing on their shoulders by moving from just looking at urine to actually looking at breast cells. So step by step, we developed a research question and a protocol, because you can't ethically study the impact of chemicals and cosmetics on humans by, willy-nilly exposing them to these chemicals. So what if we found young women who are already using these products and these chemicals and took these products away? What if we studied their breast cells in their normal state when they were exposed to the xenoestrogens in their products, and then studied their cells again after they stopped using the products and noted their changes? Our research question became, what is the impact of xenoestrogens in personal care products on normal human breast cells? So Quick Start led us through a practice grant proposal. Dr. Derkey wrote the scientific parts. She had already done a lot of research in this area, and I wrote the community parts, why our community needed these answers, how we would actually participate in the research, and what we would do with the answers when we found them. So we even sat in a mock review of our research proposal. And just to give you an idea of what it's like to be a community-based investigator, the mock review happened to be the morning after I had been up all night with a friend who was dying from breast cancer, and who actually died from breast cancer that night, just a few hours before our mock review. I didn't even have time to go home and change my clothes. Well, the mock review was very useful. The reviewers liked our proposal. They also critiqued it. And what did they find the most problematic? Harvesting breast cells 2 times from healthy women is too invasive. They will never do it. Well, with that information in hand, we applied for and received a pilot grant from CBCRP to determine if our study was feasible. And this photo right here is a photo of our potential volunteers. Every young woman on my daughter's college basketball and soccer teams signed a letter saying they would donate cells, and we included it in our research proposal. So here's one of our recruitment flyers. We recruited participants on local college campuses and through personal contacts through our own daughters. We found that graduate students in public health at Berkeley and nursing students at UCSF were great volunteers. Also had the necessity of being an ethnically diverse group. That wasn't all of our volunteers, but that was a core. We asked volunteers to list every single product they used, and then using the Skin Deep app from Environmental Working Group, we analyzed their current products to identify products that had xenoestrogens, in particular parabens and phthalates. And only the young women who used products with parabens and phthalates in them every day qualified to be in our study. Here's a version of the kits of healthy products we created for use during the intervention period. Many were donated by people like Beauty Counter, Luminance, other small companies, women-owned companies. And over time, we actually got more donations, and what we were able to supply people was even more than what's shown here. And then I held the hand of every woman while she donated breast cells with fine needle aspiration. And every single one of them knew someone with breast cancer, had lost a mother or an aunt or a grandma to breast cancer. And that was why they joined the study. After the pilot study, we applied for and got a grant from CBCRP to do a full study. The results showed that, even though we were constrained by a COVID lockdown and we had to reduce our participants from the planned 80, our study still had significant findings that showed positive changes in both cellular features and in gene expression associated with breast cancer risk after a change to products without xenoestrogens. And even more importantly, we felt like we were pioneering a new kind of research that would give faster answers, because people out there in the community really were willing to have needles in their breasts and donate breast cells, because they knew that they were going to be the next ones in line. They wanted to do something, more than, in this case, wear pink headbands to their soccer games in October. So we did publish a scientific article that Dr. Derkey wrote in the journal Chemosphere. It's called Reduction of Daily Use Parabens and Phthalates Reverses Accumulation of Cancer-Associated Phenotypes Within Disease-Free Breast Tissue of Study Subjects. Well, as you can tell, that's kind of a complicated name, and the article is indeed a very challenging article for lay people to get through. So we now see it as our mission to get the word out to regular people. We published a brochure aimed at young people called What Everyone Should Know. What you put on your body can increase your cancer risk. And we are trying to get that out to teenagers through health clinics in high schools. We are still working on more outreach, and really our goal is to get the word out to as many ordinary people as possible. If anybody has ideas or people who want to know about this information, please let me know. And then finally, here's our acknowledgements. Of course, our saviors, our teachers at California Breast Cancer Research Program, our partners at the CPMC Research Institute. That's where Dr. Derkey worked, had her lab. The Environmental Working Group helped us analyze products. Breast Cancer Prevention Partners led us through legislative work and invited us actually to come up to Sacramento and testify. Zero Breast Cancer helped us recruit participants. Our dedicated and diligent study participants, Beauty Counter, GoTube, Eco Apothecary, Luminance Skincare, Bathing Culture, who all donated products, clean products. The San Francisco Public Health Foundation, that was our fiscal agent before we incorporated and got our tax exemption, which I didn't tell you about, but all that also was happening. And then Walk Strong Bay Area, a group of women who walk to raise money for breast cancer, who granted us some money to produce the brochure that I was talking about. So thank you for listening. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Polly. I'm wondering if folks wouldn't mind popping some questions in the chat. One question that I have for Polly and for Nayamin is, if you were encountering a regular person in the community and they had the question for you, what should I do? I'm interested in researching breast cancer, or I have these questions about breast cancer in my community and I don't know how to find the answers. What would your advice be to them?
Well, I can go first. I think send them a bit on a pathway like ours. I send them to, the websites of the advocates. I mean, I can't tell you how much Breast Cancer Prevention Partners helped us. And because of, our own experiences, we knew people there. And so we actually sat down with them and they gave us more resources. Similar with Zero Breast Cancer. And just the research, that we did. We had a public health PhD student who was actually, at the time, she started as an undergrad. Now she's working on her dissertation.
Wow.
But who helped us research things. So you just have to plunge in, but ask people who are already doing this. Ask people who are like us leading a support group. And that's the other thing, is that we do still have an active support group, and the people come through there and are constantly asking, like, how did I get breast cancer? And we're helping guide them to finding out what people think might be the answers.
Thank you so much. Nayamin, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in response to that question. And we also had a question come in on the chat. Polly, where did you obtain your IRB approval?
What a great question. What a struggle. The IRB approval, IRB, for people who might not know, is the Institutional Review Board, that if you have human subjects, which we had, you have to get permission from them, and you have to get, work through an informed consent form. And so it was the California Pacific Medical Center Research Institute. Partway through, the research, the CPMC was taken over by Sutter. So suddenly we were dealing with Sutter.
145.
Suddenly we were dealing with Sutter. And we were dealing with this whole question about these women, you can't do this to people who aren't sick. They aren't going to contribute cells. And so we actually designed the informed consent form. We showed them our letter about people who wanted to do it, but it was a real struggle. And we had to put things in our informed consent form, like risks. Your shampoo might not, your hair might not look as good. Your deodorant might not work as well. That's really what they, the kinds of things that the people on the review board felt like we needed to tell our participants. But needless to say, our participants, many of whom being college athletes, they didn't care about their deodorant. So that's who our IRB was.
Thank you, Polly. We are going to be closing the room, the breakout room, in 3 minutes. So I think we might have time for one more question from the audience. If someone would like to unmute and ask a question.
I see that there's a question asking if I'm available to speak at conferences. Yeah, sure. And I think my contact info is on the conference website, but I'll put it in the chat.
And we have a question that, can you tell us about plans for sustainability?
I need more about that.
I'm thinking that it is sustainability of a research trajectory.
Oh.
How to keep your research going.
Oh my goodness.
It's an open question. I think we could ask you and Nayamin as well.
Yeah, just quickly, the science behind the cell biology and the epigenetics requires a lot of expertise. And we were lucky enough to find people locally who were doing this. Mm-hmm. And when I've been asked this before, I've always talked about, the funding for it. It's innovative, it's innovative research that is not what most people do. It's not animal research. And so it can be hard to get funding. Mm. And so I look to you guys at CBCRP. More needs to be done, but we're kind of at we're not sure where to go next.
Mhm.
But I want Nayamin to have a chance to talk. There was also a question about where you would send people who want to know how they got breast cancer.
And so the rooms are going to close automatically at 1:45. So Nayamin, if you have any thoughts about sustainability?
Yeah, well, for us, it has been like tapping into different sources, right? So right now, there's a lot of investment coming from the federal government, not so much from the state because we're in deficit on how to help build more infrastructure or, improve living conditions for people like these farm workers. But we also have like another, like this project is already throwing actions to further the investigation. While we were focused on wildfire exposure, what we keep on hearing from the residents and the participants was like, and what about the pesticides? How are the pesticides contributing to our odd risk of cancer? And we all know those are very valid questions. So we start collecting some bracelets that would allow us in the future, when we have funding, try to tap into that area. But definitely the funding is always that